My name is Sarah. I thought I'd finally found a place where my ideas mattered, you know? I just joined this small design agency, heart racing like a bird in a cage the first time I walked through the door. The walls were painted soft gray, and sunlight spilled in over white desks. It felt promising. They assigned me a mentor, Julia, who had this calm confidence that settled over the room like a warm blanket. I remember her handshake, firm and steady, and the way she looked at my notebook of sketches, eyes narrowing as if weighing every line. When she said she'd guide me, I felt my chest loosen, like I could finally breathe while someone held my hand. At first, Julia was generous. She showed me how to refine my renderings, pointing out angles I hadn't considered, complimenting the flow of one drawing, whispering tips in my ear about softening another. My pen trembled as I watched her sketch beside me, fingers light on the paper. She leaned close and said, "You have talent. But talent needs direction." My throat went dry, and I swallowed hard, nodding so fiercely my shoulders ached. Inside, I trembled with excitement, like a promise of something great waiting at the end of a tunnel. Then subtle things started shifting. Julia began to suggest small changes, phrases in client emails, color swatches in my digital layouts. She told me it was collaborative, that I should trust her instincts. I did, because who wouldn't trust someone everyone admired? But little by little, she edited my proposals without mentioning it. I'd submit a draft, and next day find it rewritten. My name was on the document, but the words felt foreign, stripped of the warmth I'd poured in. I'd sit at my desk, heart thudding so loud I thought my coworkers might hear. My hands would rest on the mouse, hovering, until I forced myself to believe she was helping, right? Then whispers began circulating. In the break room, I overheard Julia on the phone, describing my latest concept as incomplete, in her soft, measured tone. My chest slammed shut, and I gripped the edge of the counter, fingers clenching until my nails dug in. A wave of heat rushed through me, and I realized no one was editing my work, they were editing me. The confidence I'd felt turned brittle, like dry leaves I couldn't gather into a coherent pile. I tried to speak up once, voice trembling, asking Julia why my proposal had changed so drastically. She tilted her head, lips curved in a gentle smile, and said, "I'm just protecting you from mistakes you don't see." The corners of her mouth tightened, but she sounded sincere, so sincere I hesitated and let it slide. My jaw ached from clenching, and I felt tears rise, but I swallowed them back. That night, I lay awake, chest tight, replaying every moment I'd trusted her, wondering how I'd let someone dismantle me piece by piece. A few days later, a client meeting shifted everything. I watched Julia present my design as if it were her own, careful to reference her adjustments, while I stood in the corner, mouth dry as sand. My heart galloped, throat knotting, and I realized I'd become invisible. Afterward, she patted my shoulder, saying, "Nice shadowing in section 3. I forced a smile that cracked my cheeks, but inside I felt hollow. I spent that evening sifting through old files, screenshots of my original drafts, photos of sticky notes where I'd written every idea in my own messy script. My hands shook as I collected pieces of my voice she'd stolen. In that hush before dawn, I made a promise. I would reclaim those fragments of me she'd scattered, stitch them back into something undeniable. I tasted the bitterness of betrayal in my mouth, but under it was fire, something fierce and real. I would gather every altered file, every hushed conversation she engineered, and I would expose the quiet poison she'd fed me all along. And I knew, in that trembling moment, that betrayal might cut deep, but revenge would be the blade I wielded to carve my way back to myself. I spent the next few days moving through the office like a ghost of myself. Every time I caught my reflection in a darkened window, I barely recognized the woman staring back, eyes rimmed tired, shoulders hunched as though carrying invisible weights. I tried to slip back into routine, to smile at colleagues and nod at greetings, but my chest ached with the memory of every stolen word. My hands trembled when I logged in, cursor blinking on an old draft I'd once been proud of. I felt that knot tight in my throat again, that itch of betrayal crawling under my skin. One evening, under the hum of fluorescent lights, I stayed late and pulled up the earliest versions of my designs, the messy sketches in my notebook, the pixelated files I'd first sent. I laid them out on the floor around me, like evidence in a crime scene. My palms grew clammy as I compared each one to the polished versions Julia had presented. Her edits were subtle, shaded corners softened here, lines extended there, but they reshaped my vision until I saw how far I'd drifted from myself. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ground together. I pressed my palms to the floor, closed my eyes, and let the rage pulse through me. Once I'd assembled 10 or 12 drafts with her changes highlighted, I printed them on cheap office paper. The printer whirred and spat them out in a one-sheet-at-a-time rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. I stacked them on my desk and watched as the pile grew, spine stiffening with each new page. My hands hovered over the top sheet, fingertips brushing the highlighted margins, tracing the ink where my words had been morphed. My breath came jagged, my mouth dry. I leaned back in the chair, shoving my feet onto the desk and staring at the ceiling tiles as if they could answer me. Then I started jotting notes. Dates fuzzed into vague, earlier this week, or, that afternoon, bullet points of every conversation Julia and I had shared about mentoring. I scribbled, she said she wanted to protect me, and she claimed collaborative edits, each phrase feeling like a confession as I recorded it. My pen flew until my hand cramped, and I switched to typing on my laptop. I opened a blank document and titled it, Reclamation, then hesitated before typing the word. It felt both powerful and terrifying. Underneath, I began listing every proof I'd found, original file names, timestamps, email forwards, that hushed phone call I'd overheard in the break room. As I worked, the office emptied around me until only the cleaning crew remained, their distant echoes blending with the soft whir of the computers. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening for footsteps that weren't there, imagining Julia's poised figure stepping around the corner. My heart hammered, but as I typed each entry, the tremor in my fingertips lessened, replaced by a focused energy. By the time I hit save, I felt hollowed out and alive, like I'd exorcised everything she'd stolen. The next morning, I woke with a plan. I carried my laptop and the printed drafts in a slim folder, proofs of alteration I could lay out in front of anyone who'd listen. My stomach fluttered as I approached the director's office, every step measured, eyes forward. When he looked up at me, surprised by the early knock, I felt my throat constrict. I handed him the folder and said, voice tight but steady, I need you to see what's been happening with my work. His brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. I watched his face go from curiosity to concern. He called me into his office that afternoon for a private meeting. I sat across from him, folder open on the desk, heart pulsing so loud I thought the walls might hear. I explained how Julia had coaxed my drafts into her own narrative, how each small edit had built a false version of my ideas. My voice wavered, but I pressed on, swallowing the lump in my throat each time it threatened to stop me. When he asked for specific examples, I pointed to the highlighted margins and listed the email thread where I'd found her forwarded comments. My palms lay flat beside the folder, and I drew in a long breath before letting it out. Afterward, he thanked me for my honesty and promised to review it immediately. I left his office with the weight of the folder gone but a new tension settling in my chest, anticipation. In the hallway, I paused and pressed a hand to my heart, feeling its rapid beat slow to a stubborn thrum. I slid the folder into my bag and walked back to my desk with my head held a little higher, determined to reclaim every bit of my voice, one proved truth at a time. I slipped into the office before the sun had fully spilled through the blinds, heart pounding so loudly I felt it in my throat. The corridors were hushed, except for the distant hum of the air conditioner and the soft click of my heels against the tile. My bag felt heavy on my shoulder. Inside, 2 items I'd gathered to expose the truth. I paused at my desk, hands trembling as I set them down, and pressed a palm against my mouth to steady my breathing. This was it. First, I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. There it was, proof number 1, a snapshot I'd snapped during a late-night session. Julia stood at my computer, her hand poised above my latest mock-up, lips curved into that knowing smile she'd used to disarm me. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, and I remembered the cold thrill in my stomach the moment I captured it. I stared at the image until my chest tightened, tracing the curve of her finger hovering over save. It felt like holding a shard of glass, sharp and accusing. Next, I retrieved a printed screenshot, proof number 2, tucked inside a plain envelope. I smoothed it out on my desk and leaned in close. It showed her private message to the creative director, praising how she'd refined my concept flawlessly, taking full credit. The timestamp was blurred, but the words were clear. She'd framed my work as her own. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed a finger to the margin where her name appeared in bold. My hands shook, but the tremor carried a cold clarity. This was undeniable. I arranged both proofs side by side under the desk lamp, the warm light flickering over edges of paper and glossy photo. My heart felt heavy, like the weight of every stolen idea pressed down on my ribs. Yet beneath that weight, a fire burned. I refused to be silenced. I reached for my notebook and flipped to the page where I'd sketched out a rough timeline. My handwriting was a scrawl of urgency, mentorship sessions, hidden revisions, silent corrections claiming credit. I tapped the pen against the desk as I recited it aloud, voice low but steady. That afternoon, I faced the creative director in his office, the proofs folded neatly in my hands. I knocked once, then twice, and felt the tremor in my legs. When he looked up, I saw surprise flicker in his eyes. I took a breath, exhaling slow, and said, "I need you to see something." I placed the photo and screenshot on his desk. His brow furrowed as he examined them, his usual calm melted into concern. He flipped the photo, then the printed message, lips parting as he read. I swallowed against the lump in my throat and waited. He sat back, chair creaking beneath him. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. My palms went slick. I told him I'd gathered them over days, snapping pictures, downloading threads, in the hope that someone would finally hear me. My voice trembled, but each word rang with conviction. He nodded once and said, "This changes everything." My chest clenched and then loosened, like I'd exhaled a tension I'd held too long. When I stepped out of his office, the proofs felt lighter in my bag, as if transferring ownership of truth eased my burden. In the hallway, I paused and pressed my back against the cool wall, pressing my palms into the fabric of my skirt. My body still quivered, but my mind was calm, focused on the next step, ensuring these proofs reached HR intact, shielded from any chance of deletion or misplacement. I made a mental note to scan the photo and screenshot immediately, storing digital copies in a secure folder. Back at my desk, I opened a fresh email draft to HR. I wrote in clear, measured lines, "I have evidence showing unauthorized edits and misattributed credit. Attached are 2 proofs." My fingers hovered over send, pulse pounding in my ears. I pressed the key. The email whooshed away, leaving only the blinking cursor. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Later that evening, I gathered my things to leave. The office lights had dimmed, and the corridors felt quieter still. I paused at the exit, hand on the door handle, and let the arc of the proofs burn in my memory, the photo of Julia at my keyboard, the message claiming my ideas. My chest thawed from its tight coil into a warm steadiness. Whatever came next, I knew I had the truth on my side. Betrayal had cut deep, but with these proofs, I would carve out my own reckoning. I woke that morning with my chest still pounding from yesterday's confrontation. The inbox sat silent, except for a single unread message from HR. I stared at the screen, palms slick with sweat, and clicked it open. They acknowledged receipt of my email and promised to launch an investigation. My breath felt strangely shallow, like I was holding the air in my lungs too long. My shoulders slumped as relief mixed with fear. This was only the start. At my desk, the hum of computers felt louder. Colleagues wandered by with polite nods, their eyes soft but curious. I forced a tight smile, pressing my fingers against the keyboard until they stilled. Then I pulled up my timeline document and scanned each entry, the mentorship sessions, the hidden edits, the proofs I'd gathered. Each bullet point felt heavy, echoing in my chest like footsteps in an empty hall. I whispered to myself, "We'll see how it plays out," but my voice sounded distant. By late morning, Jenna slid into the seat beside me. She laid a cup of tea on my desk, steam swirling between us. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. My throat tightened and I swallowed. Nervous, I admitted, voice cracking. She nodded, tapping her fingers on the mug. They'll need time to review. Just stay ready. Her words settled around me like a blanket. I nodded, taking a sip, feeling warmth spread from my chest to my fingertips. Still, a tremor lingered beneath the surface. Then came the first crack. My draft proposal file popped an error when I tried to reopen it. I clicked again, heart sinking. The file read, corrupted, in red letters. My palms went cold. I refreshed the folder. It had vanished. My breath caught, and I felt the old panic tighten its grip. I closed my eyes, thumb pressed to my bottom lip, tasting metal and fear. Jenna leaned over and peered at my screen. What happened? She whispered. I shook my head, throat dry. I don't know. We traced the folder's history and found a deletion entry under Julia's user ID again. My chest hitched, jaw clamping shut. She's trying to undermine me, I said, voice hollow. Jenna slapped her hand on the desk. Let's not guess. Gather the logs, print them. HR will want this. My fingers fumbled to copy the audit trail, each click echoing. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, eyes stinging. This sabotage was personal and blatant. Yet I forced myself to breathe, to document, to prepare. When HR called for an update before lunch, I met them in a small office. The HR lead's desk was piled with papers. I laid out the new logs, my voice firm as I described the missing file. She nodded gravely and said, "We'll escalate this to legal." My chest contracted and released, like waves crashing and pulling away. I nodded again, swallowing hard. Her next words were a plan to suspend Julia's access until the review concluded. I let relief wash through me, though worry still gnawed at the edges. Back at my desk, the air felt thinner. I reopened my project tool and rebuilt the deleted files from local backups, my hands shaking until they found a rhythm. Every slide, every layout piece by piece. My chest tightened with each restoration, memory twisting through every pixel. When I finally saved the last version, I leaned back and closed my eyes. My breath came in shuddering exhalations, and I let the world blur around me. The afternoon passed in a haze of meetings and emails. I pushed through each task mechanically, heart still a pulse of anticipation. Every notification ping snapped my head up, expecting another missing file or a follow-up from HR. Nothing. Just routine updates from collaborators and a note from the director saying he supported our security protocols. I exhaled, chest loosening in small increments. That night, at home, I sat across from my partner in our quiet kitchen. I recounted the day in jagged fragments, email from HR, file deletion, legal escalation. His eyes were steady pools of concern. He reached across and took my hand, warmth grounding me. I realized how much I'd carried alone until now, each secret shake of my hands, each silent dread at work. Now, in this light, my trembling felt shared, watched, supported. I closed my eyes, pressing my head into his shoulder and letting exhaustion and relief wash over me. Before sleep took me, I reviewed my plans for tomorrow, a fresh backup protocol, nightly log reviews, team check-ins to share any oddities. Each item was a promise to myself and to my colleagues: no more silent fear, no more hidden injuries. I placed my phone face down on the table, shut off the lamp, and lay back, chest rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The tremors were still there, faint as whispered doubts, but beneath them was a steady drumbeat of resolve. Betrayal might have opened the wound, but transparency and vigilance would see us stronger through the nights to come. That morning, I sat at my desk before the sun had made its way through the blinds, heart racing like a bird beating against its cage. My laptop glowed with the title of the HR meeting invitation: Private Discussion Regarding Workplace Concerns. My palms went slick when I clicked Join, and I pressed my fingers against my thighs until they stilled. I leaned back, jaw locked, tasting the metallic sting of nerves in my mouth. When the HR lead and the creative director appeared on screen, I forced myself to meet their eyes. The HR lead's expression was careful, professional but tinged with unease, while the director's gaze flickered with concern as though he bore more of the weight than I did. I swallowed, the lump in my throat pressing against my voice. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said, voice catching on the last word. I opened my folder and shared my screen, revealing the timeline I'd assembled. I narrated each entry, the early mentorship sessions that shifted into stealthy edits, the forwarded emails where Julia had quietly claimed authorship, the photographs showing her poised over my work. My voice trembled, chest tightening with each detail, but I let it carry me forward. I pointed to the screenshot of her message to the creative director praising her own contributions. I described hearing her phone call in the break room, her words soft but calculating, and I felt the tremor in my hands translate into raw urgency. The HR lead clicked through the documents, brow furrowing. The creative director leaned in, lips pressed tight. When I finished, silence settled over the call like dust. My pulse pounded in my ears. I pressed my palms together, fingers interlaced, and let out a slow breath. The HR lead cleared her throat and asked a careful question. "Did you confront Julia directly before bringing this to us?" My throat constricted. I shook my head. "I was afraid of retaliation," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. My cheeks burned at the admission, even though admitting it felt like shedding a layer of shame. They exchanged glances, and the creative director spoke softly, "We understand. That's why you came to us." The HR lead nodded and said they would launch a formal investigation and request a written statement from Julia. My chest eased a fraction, though fear still twisted in my gut. When the call ended, I sat frozen, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. My shoulders loosened, just a bit, like I'd taken the first step across a chasm. Later that day, when Julia passed by my desk, I felt my breath catch. Her expression was unreadable, lips curved into that same polite smile. She paused, offering a cool nod, then drifted on. My chest constricted again, but I held my gaze steady, reminding myself that I had done the right thing. I shut my eyes for a moment, pressing my fingertips into my eyelids, and let the mantra run through me, "Trust the process." A few hours later, the HR lead emailed to schedule Julia's statement and invited me to sit in as a witness. My stomach fluttered at the thought of facing her in that room, the air thick with unsaid accusations. I spent the afternoon rehearsing silently, how I'd describe each alteration, each hidden email, each moment her mentorship turned to manipulation. My hands wrote out bullet points on a notepad, trembling at first, then growing steadier with each line. Just before the end of the day, one of the junior designers, a quiet colleague named Marco, slipped a sticky note onto my monitor. It read, "I saw her copying your files onto her USB. Let me know if you need more." My chest fluttered and then roared with relief. I pressed my palm to the note, feeling its thin paper like a lifeline. Marco glanced over and gave a subtle thumbs up, and I felt a surge of solidarity bloom inside me. That evening, I gathered my printed notes, the digital folder, and Marco's witness offer. At home, I laid them out on the kitchen table beside my partner's cup of tea. He reached across and squeezed my hand, eyes soft with pride. "You're doing this," he said gently, and I nodded, breath trembling but sure. I packed everything into a clean folder, no handwritten margins this time, and closed it with a firm snap. In the hush of night, I reviewed each point, letting the words settle in my mind. I felt the tremor in my chest transform into a steady pulse of purpose. Tomorrow, I'd look Julia in the eye, not as the grateful mentee she'd cultivated, but as a colleague armed with truth. And when I spoke, my voice would carry every hidden edit she tried to bury. I arrived at the office early again, shoulders tight as if I'd braced myself for impact. The halls were silent except for the hum of the air conditioner, and my footsteps echoed like distant thunder. I carried my folder of evidence and Marco's note, heart juddering with every step. Outside Julia's office, I paused, pressing my palm against the cool wall to steady myself. My fingers trembled, but I reminded myself that I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, I had proof, and I had the backing of HR. When the call came to gather in the small conference room, I walked in and found Julia already seated, immaculate and composed, her expression polite but guarded. The HR lead sat to my left, clipboard in hand, and the creative director to my right, arms folded. I set my folder on the table, letting its weight anchor me. My chest fluttered, but I smoothed my palms flat against the tabletop until the tremor in my fingertips softened. The HR lead began, "Thank you both for coming. Julia, we'd like your account of the mentorship process." Julia tilted her head, lips curved in that practiced smile, and said, "Of course. I've always aimed to guide Sarah's work toward our agency's standards." Her voice was soft, measured, like silk sliding over glass. I felt a flicker of something in my gut, doubt? Anger? And I swallowed, clenching my jaw so tight my teeth ground together. When she finished, the HR lead turned to me, "Sarah, please share your perspective." My throat went dry, and I pressed my lips together, pressing them flat to ward off shaking. I opened my folder and drew out the printed drafts, Marco's witness note tucked between the pages. I laid out proof number 1 and number 2, then showed the sequence of annotated files. "These are my original drafts," I said, voice low but firm. "And these versions," I tapped the darker highlights, "contain edits she made without my knowledge. Here's Marco's note about unauthorized file transfers." My chest tightened, throat bobbing as I spoke, but I met Julia's gaze without flinching. Julia's composure faltered for a flicker, her lips pressed thinner, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. The director shifted in his seat, watching her. "Can you explain why these edits weren't discussed with me?" I asked, breath hitching. I surprised myself by leaning forward, voice steadier as adrenaline lent it weight. Julia cleared her throat. "I believed, perhaps misguidedly, that I was saving time and errors by making those changes directly. I didn't think it warranted formal discussion." Her admission sounded rehearsed, like an apology sculpted in advance. I felt warmth flood my cheeks, anger and pity tangled together. My palms burned against the table, I shifted my weight, letting the tension spill through me. "But you presented that work as your own in client meetings," I said, voice wavering only for a moment. "And you sent private messages crediting yourself." I pointed to the screenshot again. That crossed a line. My breath caught, jaw locked, but I pressed every word out. Julia's eyes darted to the director, then back to me. She opened her mouth, but the HR lead raised a hand. "Let's hold that question. We'll need to verify." "Sarah, thank you for your clarity." The director nodded, scribbling notes. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, the tension coiling down in my shoulders. The room felt lighter, as if the truth had lifted a heavy veil. After the formal questions, Julia was asked to step out while HR and the director discussed next steps with me. I gathered my folder, heart thundering as I walked out, but I reminded myself that I'd spoken up. In the hallway, the gnaw of anxiety loosened into a dull pulse. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor. My legs shook, but I closed my eyes and let relief wash over me in waves. When the door reopened, HR beckoned me back in and said they would recommend disciplinary action and restitution of credit for my work. They thanked me for courage and honesty. My chest fluttered with relief, then steadied. I nodded, managing a small, genuine smile. As I left the room, the director offered a quiet, "Well done." His words felt like sunlight after a storm. By midday, whispers trailed me in the corridors, but these were different, respectful nods, small words of encouragement. Marco caught my eye by the printer and gave a discreet thumbs up. I smiled back, chest warming. Later, at my desk, I stacked the folder's pages in a drawer labeled "Closed," heart lighter than it had been in weeks. That evening, I left the office feeling unsteady but unbroken. The sky was painted in muted purples and blues, and I inhaled deep, lungs filling with the night air. The tremor in my chest had softened into a steady beat, proof that I'd reclaimed my voice and my work. And as I walked toward home, each step felt like a promise. Betrayal may have sparked this journey, but integrity would guide me forward. That morning, I walked into the office feeling something I hadn't allowed myself in weeks: genuine hope. The sun filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across the desks, and the scent of brewing coffee felt like an invitation rather than a warning. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and paused, remembering how this very spot had once felt like a battleground. Now, it felt like ground I'd reclaimed. I began by reaching out to the team with a simple message: brainstorm session at 3, just us, markers, and sticky notes. My finger hovered over send for a moment before I clicked. When replies popped up, count me in, sounds great, looking forward to it, my chest lifted with relief. I realized I was no longer isolating myself but inviting others back into collaboration. At midday, I set up in the small conference room. Jenna arrived first, her steady presence anchoring the space. Marco followed, sketchpad in hand, offering quiet thumbs up and nods. Priya, the new junior copywriter, carried a tablet displaying her notes. I spread blank color pads on the table, handed out markers, and said, "Let's build this together, every voice matters." Their faces lit up as they circled words, drew arrows, and added fragments of narrative. The energy in the room buzzed with possibility. All the while, I couldn't ignore the rumor drifting through Slack that Julia intended to rejoin projects next week. A cold knot tightened in my stomach, but I refused to let it derail me. Instead, I focused on our morning's work, vibrant sticky chains of ideas connecting empathy to strategy. When someone hesitated over a phrase, I asked gentle questions that helped them claim ownership. Watching their confidence bloom reminded me of what mentorship should feel like: nurturing, not commandeering. That afternoon, I heard Julia's name in the hallway as she spoke with the creative director, offering her expert guidance on a new account. My heart stuttered, but I kept walking, choosing action over fear. I drafted a proposal for the new client, fresh examples, bold messaging, and sent it to the director with a concise note: "I'd like to lead this account. Thank you for your consideration." My hands were steady, and my voice in writing was calm and clear. By early evening, the director replied, praising my initiative and confirming me as project lead on the new client. My chest swelled with pride, tempered by a flicker of wariness. I drafted a project plan, timelines, team roles, key deliverables. My notes were precise, optimistic, and laced with the creativity that Julia had once tried to stifle. Each bullet point felt like a declaration of autonomy. At home, I hummed quietly while preparing dinner. My partner looked up and asked, "You seem happy." I paused over the stove and smiled, saying, "We built something real today." He wrapped his arms around me from behind and said, "I'm proud of you." His warmth chased away the last edges of doubt. That night, before sleep claimed me, I lay awake picturing tomorrow's morning. Julia might reappear, emails at the ready with suggestions. But I'd be ready too, surrounded by a team whose voices I helped amplify. The betrayal I'd endured had forged something strong in me: clarity of purpose, trust in genuine collaboration, and the courage to lead with authenticity. As I drifted off, my chest settled into a calm rhythm, the old tremor now just a fading echo. I understood then that true revenge wasn't about sinking someone else, it was about rising above their lies, thriving in spite of betrayal, and building something honest from the fragments they left behind. That week began with a sense of quiet triumph. Every slide deck I opened bore the mark of collective effort rather than solo edits, and the proposal pipeline moved forward with energy I barely recognized as my own. The team buzzed around our project boards, adding color-coded sticky notes and sketching story outlines on large sheets of butcher paper. At the edge of the room, I watched as Marco and Priya debated phrasing, their voices low but animated, each correction met with nods and gentle laughter rather than tense approval. My pulse eased in that moment, the tremors in my fingers receding into background noise as I realized we'd reclaimed our creative space. But then I noticed the first ripples of unease. A critical file for the upcoming pitch had vanished from the shared drive, one I'd uploaded myself just days before. My chest tightened when I saw the alert, "File not found." I logged in, refreshed, retraced my clicks, but the design folder was empty. Instead of panic, a cold clarity settled in my veins. I alerted Jenna, who joined me at the terminal, brows furrowed. We checked permissions and recent activity logs, finding a single deletion entry under Julia's user ID. My breath hitched as anger and disbelief surged through me. I tapped back through the audit trail, each click echoing in the otherwise silent office. I gathered the team in the empty conference room, heart thudding as I explained what had happened. Faces drained of color. Priya's eyes widened, and Marco's hand flew to his mouth. I pulled up a screen share of the log, pointing to Julia's deletion record. "She's taken our work again," I said, voice low, chest tightening like steel bands. A wave of solidarity washed over the room. Jenna's hand found mine, and the others leaned in, offering quiet murmurs of support. We would not let this be a secret. I reminded everyone to back up all files locally and invited them to join me later to map out recovery tasks. Late that evening, I stayed behind with Jenna and Marco. We reconstructed the missing files from our local copies, piecing together every slide. My shoulders burned from hunching over the keyboard, but I felt fire in my veins rather than fatigue. We also copied the audit logs, printing them out in the dim light so every entry was visible, every timestamp a testament to Julia's interference. As we worked, Jenna whispered, "We should take this to HR again." I nodded, throat tight with resolve. We hashed out our next steps, a joint report documenting every instance of sabotage and a request for immediate access suspension. The next morning, I delivered the printed logs and recovered slides to the HR office, feeling a tension coil under my ribs. The HR lead looked up with concern, and I explained the deletion. My voice was steadier this time, each word sharp with purpose. She promised swift action and said she would suspend Julia's access to shared projects pending investigation. Relief washed over me, but I also felt the weight of what came next, another round of scrutiny, another test of my endurance. Back at my desk, I caught sight of Julia in the hallway, her expression inscrutable, lips curved in that familiar lilt. Our eyes met for a brief instant, and I felt the old tremor ripple through my chest. But I lifted my chin and kept walking, carrying the knowledge that this time I had allies, evidence, and the backing of HR. I paused at the break room, poured a cup of coffee, and let its warmth settle in my palms as I prepared for whatever came next. Betrayal had found new ways to lurk, but so had my resolve. I would stand firm and see this through until every shred of sabotage was exposed and every stolen moment reclaimed. I walked into the office that morning feeling the heft of yesterday's confrontation still settling in my chest, like a stone shifting under my ribs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, echoing the tension I carried with me. My desk was cleared of Julia's sabotage, files restored, logs printed, access revoked, but my shoulders still trembled with anticipation. I pressed 2 fingers to my throat, tasting that familiar metallic tang of fear and adrenaline, reminding myself I was ready. I sent a quick message to the team, "Let's regroup at 10 in the war room." As the replies popped up, "I'm in, thanks for leading this," I felt a flicker of warmth, like coals sparking under ash. When we gathered, Jenna gave me a nod that said more than words. We huddled around the conference table, papers and laptops spread like a map of our recovery plan. Marco's face was earnest, Priya's eyes bright with determination. I cleared my throat, heart pulsing so loud I worried they'd hear it. "Today we rebuild," I said, voice low but steadfast. "And we set up real safeguards so she can't touch our work again." We started by reassigning permissions in our project management tool. I guided them through error-proof checklists, 2-person sign-offs, version control checkpoints, timestamp audits. Each new rule felt like another brick stacked against betrayal. My hands moved over the keyboard, fingers steady now, driven by purpose rather than panic. When I clicked save, I felt a quiet rush of triumph. My chest loosened just enough to remind me I was still human. Then we reviewed the pitch deck for the next client. I watched Jenna's finger hover over a slide, hesitation flickering across her brow. I asked, "What's on your mind?" She pointed to a section where data points looked cramped. My heart softened when I realized she felt safe enough to speak up. "Let's move that graph," I said, "and make the text clearer." My voice came out warmer than I expected, shaded with reassurance. Her shoulders dropped, and she gave me a small, grateful smile. I felt the tension ebb in my chest, replaced by something like relief. By midday, the office floor hummed with low conversations instead of silence. Colleagues passed my desk with nods and thumbs up. Lisa stopped by and slipped a fresh cup of tea onto my keyboard, a gesture so simple it made my chest swell. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and let the steam drift across my face. I realized I was cradling more than tea. I was holding the trust I'd rebuilt. That afternoon, the HR lead dropped by for a quick check-in. She thanked me for my thorough documentation and said the investigation had confirmed every instance of Julia's interference. She left with a promise of formal reprimand and a plan for team-wide training on secure collaboration. After she left, I sank into my chair and let out a breath so long it rattled in my lungs. My hands shook at first, then stilled as I pressed them flat on the desk, palms down, grounding myself. Later, I sensed an undercurrent, Julia's name on someone's lips in the break room. My chest tightened, echoing the old dread. I paused at the threshold and took a slow breath, pressing my fingertips into my temples until the pulse slowed. I reminded myself she no longer had power here. I crossed my arms and walked in, greeting everyone with calm eyes. Their smiles were genuine, no fear lingered in their glances. When I poured my coffee, I caught Lisa's eye. She gave me a thumbs up, and I felt the tremor in my chest fade further, replaced by quiet confidence. As the day wound down, I opened a blank document and titled it, Best Practices, Secure Collaboration. I drafted guidelines for new hires, clear protocols for feedback, and channels for anonymous tip-offs if anyone felt uneasy. My pen hovered over the line, trust, but verify, and I typed it, feeling each letter settle like a promise. My shoulders relaxed as I fleshed out examples from our ordeal, turning our pain into a roadmap for resilience. That evening, I packed up, stacking the printed logs in a drawer marked, Resolved. I turned off my monitor and swept my chair back, feeling the office exhale with me. Outside, the sky was this muted wash of twilight that felt like a breath held and then released. I paused at the door, hand on the handle, and let the hush of the moment wash through me. My chest was still buzzing, but the tremors were gone. I stepped into the corridor, head as straight as I could manage, and walked toward home with a steady gait. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring fresh challenges, new projects, new collaborators, and perhaps echoes of yesterday's betrayals. But as I walked out, I felt a pulse of something stronger than fear, the conviction that I could weather any storm because I'd rebuilt my voice and my workspace from the ground up. The path ahead was still jagged, but I carried a lightness in my chest that told me I was ready for whatever came next. I arrived at the office that morning with a sense of purpose humming through my veins, like I'd plugged into a new current. The corridors felt quieter, the usual morning chatter muted by anticipation. Today wasn't just another workday. It was the leadership summit where I'd present our secure collaboration framework to the entire executive team. My chest tightened with excitement and a thin edge of nerves, but I sat at my desk and opened my notes, fingers tracing the bullet points I'd refined late into the night. Each section of the presentation felt like a stitch pulling together everything we'd learned from betrayal and rebuilding. I slipped into the conference hall before anyone else, the projector's glow warming the screen with our title slide, Building Trust Through Transparency. My laptop sat on the podium, and I arranged my printed handouts in neat stacks on the side table. My pulse fluttered when I saw Julia's name in the attendee list. She'd been included by mistake, or maybe to witness how far I'd come. Either way, her presence made the knot in my gut tighten. I pressed my palm against the lectern, inhaled deeply, and let the tremor in my shoulders settle. As participants filtered in, directors, department heads, HR representatives, even the creative director who'd championed me, I offered a tentative smile and greeted them with quiet confidence. Jenna slipped in last, giving me a reassuring nod before she settled beside Marco in the front row. When the room finally fell silent, I clicked the remote and advanced to the first slide, a brief recap of the sabotage incidents, laid out as facts rather than accusations. My voice rippled through the room as I described hidden edits, unauthorized deletions, and legal threats. Each detail was accompanied by clear documentation, audit logs, email screenshots, witness statements. The atmosphere felt charged, like a collective intake of breath. I advanced to the next section, our recovery process. I spoke of collaboration sessions, the backup protocols we'd implemented, and the guidelines for two-person sign-offs. As I outlined each safeguard, I watched heads nod, brows unfurrow, and colleagues lean forward. When I reached the part about emotional impact, how betrayal had shaken trust and how rebuilding required acknowledging vulnerability, my voice caught on a tremor, but I pressed on, steadying myself on the lectern. Jenna's supportive glance from the front helped me hold the room. Then came the interactive portion. I invited participants to break into small groups and apply our checklist to hypothetical scenarios. I paced between tables as they debated how to respond if, say, a mentor made unilateral changes or if a project folder disappeared. Their conversations were earnest, sometimes heated, but always grounded in respect. I felt a glow of pride in watching them wrestle with these situations, proof that the lessons we'd learned were resonating beyond our team. Back in the main room, I collected feedback forms and highlighted key suggestions, a dedicated changelog channel in our project tool, quarterly trust audits, and a safe space hotline for reporting concerns. I jotted these on the whiteboard, each new idea landing like a drumbeat of collective commitment. When I closed with a vision statement, a workplace where transparency transforms fear into trust, the room broke into genuine applause. My chest swelled with relief and accomplishment, the kind that comes from turning one's darkest moments into shared strength. During the Q&A, the creative director asked how we'd handle any future incidents. I outlined a rapid response protocol, immediate freeze of access, automatic notification to HR, and a peer review team to verify edits. The questions that followed were precise and collaborative, not skeptical or accusatory. Even Julia, seated near the back, raised her hand to ask about training frequency. Her tone was measured, and I answered with the same openness I'd practiced. As I spoke, I sensed the room's energy shift. What had once been a tale of betrayal was now a blueprint for resilience. After the summit ended, the board chair approached me. He shook my hand, eyes bright. "This was invaluable," he said. "We'll adopt these measures company-wide." Jenna and Marco appeared beside me, beaming. I realized my hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline that comes with victory. I pressed them flat against my thighs, grounding myself in the moment. Later, back at my desk, I found a new email thread titled "Next Steps, Organizational Rollout." My chest fluttered reading the outline for training sessions, tool integrations, and leadership check-ins. The first bullet point was my name, slated to lead the initiative. I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath as long as I'd held it, and typed a quick reply, ready and eager to begin. Then I clicked send and leaned back, letting the chair catch me. That evening, as I walked to my car under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt the familiar tremor in my chest, the echo of what I'd endured, now softened into a quiet hum of possibility. Betrayal had taught me to distrust, but rebuilding had taught me to trust again, not just others but myself. And as I slipped into the driver's seat, I realized the true victory wasn't in exposing Julia or safeguarding systems, it was in reclaiming my voice and transforming my pain into a beacon for everyone around me. I arrived that morning with a slow certainty humming beneath my skin, as if the summit's glow still stayed with me. The newly posted rollout schedule blinked in my inbox, training sessions, workshops, feedback loops stretching weeks into the future. My chest felt both light and full, like I'd traded a burden for purpose. I brewed a pot of coffee and poured a cup, savoring the warmth as I reviewed the first session's agenda, Empathy and Edits, a workshop co-led by Jenna and me. The title made me smile, because it named what we'd learned through betrayal, that every change needs understanding before it's made. I sipped, letting the steam cloud my vision for a moment, and reminded myself that this was as much about healing as it was about process. When the hallway buzzed with morning bustle, I set up the training room with colored markers, sticky notes, and printed scenarios drawn from our own experiences. Colleagues trickled in, some still guarded, others bright-eyed, and I caught a few glances at my name on the facilitator list. I felt a tremor of nerves, like I'd forgotten to breathe, but I steadied myself with a deep inhale. At the table's head, I welcomed them softly. "Today, we start by sharing what makes us feel heard." Their responses ranged from hesitant smiles to frank nods. As each person spoke, about times their work was rewritten without consent, about hidden comments under proposals, I felt the tension in the room soften, replaced by something raw and honest. My throat pinched at one point, but I pressed on, reminding myself that vulnerability was our greatest safeguard against the hidden knife. Over the next hour, Jenna and I guided them through roleplay. One person acted as mentor, the other as mentee, enacting a scenario where feedback veered into takeover. I felt my chest quicken every time a participant hesitated to assert their boundary. Their voices shook, shoulders tensed, brows knit with conflict. But when they paused and then said, "Please talk me through your suggestion," I saw something shift, resistance giving way to dialogue. I offered encouragement, voice low and genuine, acknowledging every tremor of bravery. By the end, sticky note chains of "I feel" statements looped around the conference room walls, testaments to reclaimed confidence. A few days later, I walked past the open-plan desks and spotted Julia's now vacant station. It felt surreal, like a wound left a scar in her absence. My chest tightened for a flicker, but then I turned to see Marco collaborating with a new intern, both leaning over a shared monitor. Their easy chatter reminded me how far the culture had come, collaboration without fear. I slipped into the adjacent lounge where the creative director waited with my next challenge, adapting the framework for remote teams scattered across time zones. My pulse fluttered. This was uncharted territory, but I welcomed it. We brainstormed ideas, virtual edit checks, short video reflections, rotating peer reviews. I jotted notes furiously, heart racing with excitement rather than dread. That afternoon, I received an unexpected message from HR. The board asked for your reflections on leading cultural change. Would you record a short interview? My breath caught in my throat. Public speaking had once felt like stepping onto a stage of knives. But now, the idea of sharing our lessons felt empowering. I drafted bullet points: betrayal's sting, the power of evidence, the necessity of empathy, and how transparency fortified trust. When I hit record, my voice quavered for a moment, then found resonance in its honesty. I spoke of trembling hands gathering proofs, of the relief found in shared witness notes, of the pride in guiding others beyond silent fear. By the time I pressed stop, my chest hummed with a calm I hadn't known before. That evening, I walked through the park on my way home, dusk folding trees into silhouettes. I replayed the day's moments, colleagues sharing, director collaborating, HR amplifying our story. My chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, each breath a reminder that wounds can yield growth. A stray breeze brushed my cheek, and I felt the ache of those early betrayals settle into a quiet pulse of resilience. I realized revenge had never been about retribution, it was about reclaiming voice and agency. And as the twilight deepened, I felt a promise in my bones, that this new culture, proofed by honesty and respect, would keep us safe from the hidden knife for years to come. I woke that morning with a restless tightness curled around my ribs, like a coil ready to spring. The office felt charged before I even stepped inside, coffee brewing, monitors flickering to life, hushed greetings rolling under the hum of overhead lights. I set my bag down and ran my fingers over the edge of my folder labeled Secure Collaboration Rollout. My breath felt shallow, and I pressed a hand to my chest to steady the tremor in my ribs. I'd spent the weekend drafting a series of bite-sized training videos to complement our in-person workshops. Now I needed to see whether they resonated. I queued up the first clip, a 2-minute segment on asking before editing, and gathered the junior designers around a cluster of chairs. Their faces reflected curiosity and slight wariness, as though they'd been burned before by open mic sessions that went sideways. I clicked play. The video opened with a simple scenario: a mentor diving into a junior's work without warning. The animation was spare, just silhouettes and highlight boxes, but the message landed like a rock in my gut. I watched their shoulders stiffen, and I felt my own chest clench at the memory of Julia's unannounced revisions. The narrator's voice, mine, re-recorded in a soft, measured tone, said, "It's okay to pause and ask, may I suggest a change?" When the clip ended, I kept the room quiet a few beats too long, letting the echo of that question resonate. Then I cleared my throat and said, "How does that land for you?" A young graphic artist rubbed her arm and answered, voice tentative, "It feels respectful. Like I'm not going to get blindsided." I nodded, chest expanding with relief, and asked if anyone else felt differently. A copywriter added, I'd rather invite feedback than have to scramble and proof what someone else produced. Her words felt like a mirror to my own journey, proof that small gestures could rebuild trust. Next, I introduced the second video, logging every change. This one was more technical, screen captures showing how to track edits in our project tool, with prompts to add brief comments explaining why each change was made. I sensed their eyes drift to their own monitors, where change histories often looked like frenzied scribbles. When the clip ended, one of them said, "But won't that slow us down?" My chest pinched at the question. It echoed my own fear that transparency might hamper creativity. I folded my hands and replied, "Maybe for a moment. But in the long run, it prevents confusion, mistrust, and worst of all, hidden sabotage." My voice cracked on the last word, and I swallowed, feeling the familiar tremor in my throat. We spent the next hour role-playing quick scenarios. One person offered a revision, the other requested context before accepting it. Laughter bubbled up when someone mimed a panicked reaction, eyes wide, hands flapping, at a surprise edit. My ribs eased with the lightness, even as I reminded everyone that the point was not perfection but practice, building muscle memory for respectful collaboration. I watched colleagues trade tips on how to annotate changes succinctly, and I felt a warmth spread across my chest, a fellowship of shared vulnerability. After the session, Jenna and I collected feedback forms. Comments ranged from eye-opening to, "Can we make these videos mandatory?" I felt the thrill of momentum, but also the sting of responsibility tightening around my heart. I told Jenna I worried I'd missed something, an edge case that could trip us up later. She put a hand on my shoulder, her touch steady. "We're building as we go," she said. "That's how real change happens." Later, I retreated to the quiet of the empty office and reviewed the session's notes. My folder had swelled with scribbled ideas, a 3-minute check-in at kickoff meetings, an anonymous suggestion box, bi-weekly trust retrospectives. Each note made my chest tighten with possibility, like a muscle waking up after cramping. I arranged the papers into piles, labeling them immediate, follow-up, and long-term vision. My hands moved deliberately, grounding the whir of my mind. As the day wound down, I sent a summary email to the team, key takeaways, upcoming training modules, and a call for volunteers to join a rotating, peer guardian roster. I hit send and felt the tremor in my chest settle into a calm hum of anticipation. Outside, the sky was a muted canvas, and when I packed up to leave, I paused at the window, breathing in the hushed evening air. My ribs expanded with each inhale, and I realized how far I'd come, from silent fear of hidden knives to orchestrating open dialogue around each cut. Tomorrow, I'd refine the video scripts based on feedback, and the day after, I'd lead our first, trust retrospective. Each challenge felt like a step higher on a ridge I once thought unclimbable. As I walked out, the tension in my chest had softened into a steady beat of resolve, and the promise that true collaboration, built on transparency and respect, could keep the shadows at bay. That morning, I woke with the quiet buzz of anticipation threading through my chest. The trust retrospective was scheduled for first thing, and I felt the familiar tremor flicker in my ribs as I sipped my coffee. Outside, the city's skyline blurred in dawn haze like a promise unformed. Inside, I gathered my notes and a set of blank cards, one per team member, to guide our session. My hands shook just enough to remind me how far I'd come. By the time I stepped into the conference room, Jenna had already set out colored markers and a flip chart. Marco arrived next, balancing his sketchpad and a fresh confidence that shone in his steady posture. The others trickled in, some quiet, some curious, all carrying the weight of weeks spent rebuilding trust. I motioned to the cards, "Write one thing that's working and one thing we can improve." As they wrote, I felt the air shift from nervous energy to thoughtful reflection. Priya was first to share. She read her card in a soft voice, "Working, open feedback. Improving, more clarity on remote edits." Her shoulders relaxed as she spoke, her words an offering rather than a complaint. I scribbled "remote edit protocol" on the flip chart and nodded. "We'll refine that," I said. My voice felt grounded, though my chest hummed with a cocktail of relief and resolve. Next, Marco tapped the marker against his chin. He talked about how the new backup rules had saved hours of reconstruction after Julia's last sabotage. He laughed, genuine laughter that rippled through the room, and confessed he'd once felt afraid to speak up. I remembered the early days when he'd watched my hands tremble around my mouse. Now, he was testament to the shift we'd engineered together. I pressed my palm to the table, feeling its solid surface beneath me, and said, "Your voice matters." We went around twice more, each card revealing something deeper: the need for occasional one-on-one check-ins, a suggestion for shorter daily stand-ups, a hope that our new collaboration tools would remain consistently enforced. When it was my turn, I pulled out a card I'd written earlier: working, shared ownership. Improving, safeguards against silent edits. I felt heat coil in my throat as I spoke, acknowledging how betrayal still shadowed our progress. I met each pair of eyes, letting the vulnerability settle in the quiet space between us. After capturing every point on the chart, I asked, "What are our next steps?" Hands shot up eagerly. Jenna volunteered to draft the remote edit protocol. Priya offered to test a tagging feature for asynchronous feedback. Marco would help configure permission settings in our project tool. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, like dawn light spilling over dark ground, as each person claimed a responsibility. Then a soft knock came at the door. The HR lead slipped in, holding an envelope stamped with our agency seal. My throat tightened, pulse rattling in my ears. She handed it to me and said quietly, "A word from leadership." I opened it to find an announcement, a formal recognition of our Secure Collaboration initiative, with a budget for company-wide rollout and pilot programs in other departments. My chest swelled with triumph. Behind me, the team's collective breath seemed to catch. I cleared my throat and read the statement aloud. "Your work has set a new standard. We endorse your methods and will integrate them organization-wide." The room hummed with applause, soft at first, then genuine. I pressed the envelope to my heart, tears prickling my eyes as gratitude and vindication mingled in equal measure. I felt my shoulders loosen and my hands still into calm ripples. Later, at my desk, I organized the retrospective notes into an action plan. Each item was a promise I'd keep: clear edit protocols, regular retrospectives, secure archives, open channels for feedback. My chest carried a rhythmic pulse, each beat echoing with purpose. When I shut down my computer, I felt the tremor fade into a quiet strength that pulsed beneath my skin. That evening, I walked home under a sky washed in rose and slate. I replayed the day's moments, cards laid on the table like seeds planted in shared soil, the HR envelope arriving like rain to nourish new growth. My chest rose with each breath, steady and unafraid. Julia's edits had tried to bury me, but through collective trust and unwavering resolve, I'd unearthed something stronger. As I stepped through my front door, I felt the certainty that betrayal had been the forge that shaped our integrity, and together we would keep it bright against any shadow. That morning, I slipped into the office feeling a soft lightness in my chest, like the engine of my confidence was humming almost too quietly after the storm. The windows were fogged with early dew, and the hush of colleagues settling at their desks wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I set my bag down, smoothed the papers in my folder, and paused, letting the simple act of standing in this space feel like a small victory. I spent the first stretch catching up on messages from remote teammates, their voices popping up in chat windows with quick thumbs-up emojis and notes of thanks for the recent Trust retrospective. I typed replies carefully, savoring the warmth that each acknowledgement brought, and realized how different it felt to interact without suspicion lurking beneath every line. My fingers glided over the keys as I arranged a summary of yesterday's action items and sent it to the broader group, mindful of tone and clarity. I exhaled a breath that I didn't know I'd been holding, feeling the tremor at my ribs settle into a quiet beat. A little later, a small group gathered at the long table for our weekly check-in. Jenna brought fresh pastries, and Marco carried his sketchpad, still buzzing from mapping out our new permission control diagrams. As we shared updates, I watched my teammates speak with an ease that made my chest swell. Someone pointed out how the new edit check reminders on our project board had caught a mislabeled file. Another laughed about catching an accidental overwrite before it became a problem. Each moment of collaboration felt like thread woven into a safety net. When it was my turn, I highlighted our progress on the remote edit protocol and shared a rough draft of tutorial slides. My voice held steady, even when I admitted areas that still needed fine-tuning. The room responded with constructive suggestions, not judgment, and I felt a flush of gratitude bloom in my chest. In a quiet lull, I wandered to the archives to file the latest audit logs. The cabinets were cool to the touch, and I handled each folder with care, each label a testament to battles fought and lessons learned. As I slid one folder into its slot, I caught a glimpse of a dusty binder from before everything went sideways. I paused, heart tightening for a moment before reminding myself of how far we'd come. I closed the binder gently and turned away, letting the past remain a lesson rather than a weight. By mid-afternoon, I had a quick check-in with HR to share data from our post-training survey. Responses showed growing trust scores and a marked decrease in unapproved edits. Their congratulations felt genuine, and they asked if I'd share our methods at an upcoming town hall. My chest fluttered at the thought. Public speaking still carried a pinch of nerves, but I agreed. I knew that telling our story might help other teams find their way out of similar shadows. Later, as dusk crept through the blinds, I found a note taped to my monitor, handwritten this time. "Thanks for showing us the way." No name. Just a smiley face. My throat tightened with emotion, and I pressed my palm to where someone's words had landed. I realized the journey had shifted me. I was no longer defined by betrayal or by the tremors it instilled. I was defined by the bridges I'd helped build and the trust I'd nurtured. That evening, I lingered at my desk until the lights clicked off around me. The corridor's quiet felt different now, expectant rather than forbidding. I gathered my things, closed the secure collaboration binder, and gave one last look over the workspace we'd reclaimed. Outside, the sky was bruised purple, and I stepped into it with a sense of calm determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, fresh collaborators, unexpected hurdles, but I would meet them knowing that transparency and respect had become our strongest defenses. Betrayal had taught me to lock down my voice, reclaiming it had taught me to open a path for everyone. And as I walked toward home, the rhythm of my steps echoed the steady beat in my chest, a quiet promise that we would keep building, keep trusting, and keep moving forward together. That morning, I slid into the empty office with a quiet sense of closure humming beneath my ribs, like the last chord of a song held softly in the air. The secure collaboration binder sat on my desk, its pages worn from weeks of use. I ran a fingertip along its spine, feeling every dog-eared corner and margin note, a testament to the journey we'd taken. My chest felt at once heavy with memory and light with relief, as if the weight of betrayal had finally been laid to rest. I spent the first hour drafting a thank you email to the entire team, weaving in memories of our darkest days and celebrating the trust we'd rebuilt. My fingers hovered over the keyboard with a flutter in my stomach, nervous gratitude rather than fear. When I hit send, I felt a thrill of warmth flood my chest, imagining each person reading those words and recalling the literal nights we'd poured over audits and proofs, side by side. Later, I joined the weekly leadership call, not as a defender of my own work but as a mentor to others facing similar challenges. I shared our framework for transparent edits, remote edit protocols, and trust retrospectives. My voice carried the calm confidence I'd fought so hard to reclaim, and I watched faces light up as colleagues from other departments bookmarked my slides. In that moment, the tremor in my heart quieted to a steady hum of purpose. After the call, I slipped into the hall where cleaning staff still moved through hushed rows of desks. I paused by the spot where Julia's workstation once sat, now completely cleared. A flicker of memory passed through me, the cold shock of discovering stolen drafts, the hollow ache of erased contributions. I inhaled, letting the memory pass like a cloud. My shoulders felt looser, my breath fuller. The space no longer haunted me, it belonged to the future we'd built instead. At midday, I met with 2 new team members, recent hires eager to learn our best practices. They watched as I walked them through our change logging tool, showing how to annotate each edit with a brief rationale. My hands guided their cursors through the steps, and I felt a gentle pride in teaching them to guard against silent revisions. When they thanked me for the clarity, my chest swelled with something like peace. That afternoon, I found a moment alone in the break room, steam rising from my coffee. I looked at my reflection in the window, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, and I realized how far I'd come from the trembling anxiety I once carried like armor. My mouth curved into a soft smile as I cradled the mug, warmth spreading through me. Betrayal had carved a path of fear, but reclaiming my voice had shown me resilience I never knew I had. Before leaving, I tucked the Secure Collaboration binder into a drawer labeled Legacy, alongside folders of final reports and client testimonials. I closed the drawer with a soft click, a small ritual marking the end of our chapter of reckoning. My fingertips lingered on the handle as if savoring the moment, then I turned away, chest open and unguarded. Walking down the empty hallway toward the exit, I traced the route I used to run from fear, past conference rooms where I once froze, past desks where I once sat trembling. Now, each step felt unhurried and unafraid. I reached the front door and paused, hand on the handle. Outside, the sky was painted in the soft glow of dusk, colors bleeding into one another like the promise of new beginnings. As I stepped into the fading light, my breath filled my lungs steadily, without that old hitch of doubt. I carried with me the knowledge that betrayal had tested me, but that vindication had taught me how to transform pain into collective strength. My heart throbbed not with fear but with anticipation for tomorrow's challenges, because I knew I had the tools, the allies, and the unwavering voice to meet them.